When I was in the classroom, I had a lot of trouble with teachers' editions because I found them visually very confusing. So we really worked hard with our steering committee, which was fourth grade teachers and curriculum directors and literacy specialists from different parts of the state. Tell us what could be in it, what were the essential elements to be in a teacher's edition, and how could we make them visually distinct enough to be helpful rather than confusing. And in the teacher's edition, we have a professional handbook, and this blue-gray color is one that's not used in the chapter, so it's like a little reference book right at the beginning of the teacher's edition that gives you background in case there's some elements that we talk about or use and that aren't familiar to you. So this is there for reference, and it'll have its own Roman numerals because the rest of the teacher's edition pages match up with the student pages, so you always know that you're on the same page with your students. There's a introduction, just the kind of introduction that Corey and I have just done to tell you what the components are, how it works, and important, in the lower right-hand corner, there's a key that we repeated all the time because when we did our pilot edition of chapter 3 that Corey went through with you, is the chapter that I took to 16 classrooms around the state and that students weighed in on. Chapter 6 was a chapter that we piloted and the teachers weighed in, and we forgot to include a key. So we have a key, often repeated, that tells you that if it's a little blue box, it's the activity guide that we're referring to. If it's a gold box, with TLH, it's thinking like a historian. If it's a red box with LS, it means it's a literacy strategy. And then HN is the history notebook, which is nothing that we've written, but there are many suggestions for student writing. So each chapter contains very much that relates to reading and writing, reading for information and being able to talk about that, or writing key questions, or discussing vocabulary. So it's guided reflection. And then there are specific literacy strategies. Susan O'Leary, who's a literacy specialist in the Madison School District, actually helped us by coming up with different strategies for each chapter based on the content of that chapter. And I know there are literacy strategies that are taught in reading, in content level reading. So for instance, in the first chapter, which is Connecting to Our State Story, the chapter that I talked about with Thinking Like a Historian, the idea is memorizing those conceptual categories. So students have them right at their fingertips to use in the rest of the book. That's the only kind of memorizing we want students to do. Just the methodology. The rest is to understand how to apply it. And where chapter 2, which is on geography, it's visualizing because we want students to be able to have that little Wisconsin map in their heads where the physical regions are, so that every time it's referred to, and we have those, as Corey pointed out in chapter 3, there are maps throughout the book, not just in chapter 1, but chapter 2, but that's where the map reading skills are taught. And visualizing, how does Wisconsin look? Where is the eastern lowland and ridges? Where is the western upland? So they began to have that as part of their own reference. And then asking questions, which is very important. What kinds of questions can we ask of the past? We try that out right away with the first people. The fur trade chapter, chapter 4, would be synthesizing. Becoming Wisconsin is determining importance, where there's so many key incidents that happen between the fur trade and statehood, and the way that land through treaties is transferred from Indians to Euro-Americans. So what's important to remember? How do we determine that? Those are really important skills in reading that are not typically, it's harder to teach that with fiction, with literary text. And it's very, I think that the idea of reading for information is one of the reading skills that students don't always have the opportunity to learn, and we've tried to really work on that. and so that teachers should not feel guilty about using this during their reading period. And then making connections, which is really important because we contrast in the immigrant chapter 7 distinct little mini biographies from the 1820s all the way up to the late 20th century with people coming. And then in the Wisconsin and the Civil War, it's inferring, chapter making inferences, which I know from looking over and listening to teachers talk about reading tests, that tests for reading are often determined on closely reading questions and being able to make inferences. And then chapters 8 through 12 have more than one strategy. So we're just reinforcing and repeating the earlier strategies, and teachers can use one or both of those. Then this is an overview, just a graphic overview of all the Thinking Like a Historian questions throughout the book in one 2-page spread, though each chapter has its own. This is a way for a teacher to look over and find how do those questions change as the book progresses from the first chapter through the 12th. Then we include a dictionary of literacy instructional terms, so if there's anything that one of the literacy specialists has suggested that's unfamiliar to you, you'll have a place to go to see. This is several pages of where each of the terms is actually given with a fuller explanation. And then here is a view of before each chapter, and we're again using chapter 3 just for continuity's sake, a graphic overview of that chapter, again with all of the topics and big ideas, the teaching points, which include the literacy strategy. In this case, it would be questioning techniques, and then supporting materials. And so you see both pages that has that, and all of those little icon boxes. And then there's also, for each chapter, a 2-page introduction that's written. One would be a content overview, and the other is the literacy strategy with an explanation. And then you'll see that each page, and I'll go through these pages, has certain elements that are in common. For every student page, the student pages, they're small but small enough but it's still large enough to be able to read. And then strategies and ideas that you can use if you choose to. And there's always, in the upper left-hand corner, if you look at the double page spread, there's always a big ideas. That means the big ideas that are on this for this couple of pages. Of course, those are to support the large Thinking Like a Historian questions. So in this case, it would be the importance of the Thinking Like a Historian questions and the timelines, AD and BC, and thinking in thousands of years, helping students do that, and what does that mean on a timeline. And then the main teaching points are always there. A teaching note is there if there is something to note, just a little aside to you. And then for the introductory pages, it would be using text structures. How do you use that graphic information in the introduction to support understanding, student understanding, helping a student do this, because once they are familiar with this, they'll be applying it in every chapter. And you'll see that there's, in any of those text boxes for teachers, there's different color fonts. So if it's in black, it means it's information for you. If it's in red, it's a question that you can ask directly to your students. And if it's in blue, it's a possible student response. There's always a previewing and predicting box that would come before you actually get into the text box, but that moves around depending on where the graphics designer had room to include it. And it always has a box with supporting materials, so you'll know if there are pages, if the students use a history notebook, their history notebook, or if there are materials in the activity guide that you might want to either Xerox for your students or use as a visual aid in the classroom. And then you'll see these elements repeated on every spread. In this case, and this is the one of the two focus spreads that Corey talked about, you'll see there's reading the text now. And reading the text is, to help students actually read those text boxes. We do say in the teacher's edition that it's really important for students to use the visual clues on the page first. I know that some students are driven, what's the reading going to be? But we really want to get them thinking about that reading through previewing and predicting, through using the graphic and visual elements, so that by the time they get to the reading, they've already got a little mindset for what they're going to read. Because that's one of the things about informational text that's very different from reading a literary text. And this is just a close-up of one that has of a page that has the reading the text. Of course, you're free as teachers to use any or all of these aids. If it's simpler for you to look at the whole chapter and read ahead all of these things and then use the student text, or just use the student text when you're working with your class, that's fine. If it makes you feel more comfortable to teach directly using some of these materials, that's fine. There's no perfect or right answer on how to use all the elements, and we probably have more elements for each two pages than you might want to use, but we wanted to make each example complete so that you have those choices to make. So you can see that there's more or less text depending on what the specific examples of pages are. And you can watch that. We do have the boxes color-coded to help you. So the big ideas are always shaded in the chapter color, and previewing and predicting is always a kind of a blue background. The main teaching points and reading the text are always white, as is the supporting, and the teaching note in the lower left-hand corner has a slight pink tinge. So just to help you orient yourself as you're looking through. There's the students, the teachers and the students both asked to have the places to visit and things to read right within the student book rather than confined in the teacher's edition, so that students could feed themselves. The interested student can go right to the library or to your classroom collection for other resources. Again, we're trying to say that it is a textbook, and a textbook is an overview and an introduction. This isn't all of the kinds of information. It's just a broad look at Wisconsin from glaciers to 9/11. So we want students to go beyond that. We also, I think this is important for if you're just doing this book chapter by chapter, to understand that all Indians, all information about Wisconsin's first people is not in Chapter 3. That Indians have played and continue to play a role in the development of our state and our story. So that you see here, and this is from Chapter 11, when protecting our environment, we have Aldo Leopold, and we have E.M. Griffith, a forester, and we have Chief Oshkosh from the 19th century, and we have Walt Burchett from the late 20th century, and Gaylord Nelson, all as spokespeople who recognized the importance of safeguarding our natural resources. This is just a closer-up view of that. And then, again, when we talk about the struggle for equal rights, are the serious content of the spread is not just in the working toward understanding Milwaukee's housing discrimination that African Americans fought against in the 1960s, but the struggle for equal rights for women, the struggle for treaty rights, and that these issues for rights were not confined to one single story, but were spontaneous expressions from different people looking for a more just society. And that's the end of what I have for the teacher's edition, unless I have any questions, and I can go back to any pages you might like. Then we'll bring Corey up to show you the last of the printed components, which is the student activity guide. And then we will have more materials that will appear online.